Hello, book lovers. Welcome to Must Love Books. Hello, book lovers, and welcome to Must Love Books. Today, I am here with Thea Claire. Hello, Thea.
Hi,
How are you today?
I'm doing good. Bracing for that cold Texas weather coming in this weekend.
So, you just had a new book release. Why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, so Go Find Less released on January 2nd, and it is a grumpy sunshine, second chance romance based here in Dallas, where I'm at. And it is a kind of an opportunity to write a love letter to Dallas and the things that I love about this area, but it's also a little bit of a personally inspired story. In 2019, I became a widow, and I wanted to use that experience and the things that I went through, both through the grieving process and kind of building that, what they call a chapter two, into a really fun romance love story with a lot of great secondary characters and fun found family aspects. And that kind of turned into Go Find Less. And so this story is about Piper, who is a widowed lingerie designer here in the heart of Dallas, and Fitz, who is a event company executive at a kind of large conglomerate company here. And they're kind of reunion while planning their high school reunion and that planning process and bringing them together for the first time in a decade. And it's about a 3 out of 5 spicy level. That's what I've been getting from my spicier readers that love kind of the 5 spice level. But it's a really fun kind of emotional read. It's definitely not a rom-com lighthearted all the way through. It will make you feel all the feels.
All the feels. I love that. Definitely
Yes.
love an opportunity to really get invested and feel a little bit of everything.
Most definitely. I've been yelled at by several people for making them cry repeatedly. And I'm like, I warned you. I told you it wasn't going to be all sunshine and daisies. Like, but I feel like those are the books that really like stick with you.
Yeah, absolutely. They definitely leave a little something behind and stick with you. They leave a little bit of
For
an
sure.
imprint, for sure. I absolutely agree. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your writing process with writing Go Find Less?
Yeah. So I started this book in March of 2023. So a little bit under a year ago. And I picked reading and writing back up last spring after getting sober in December of 2022. And so it kind of became what we call a manic sober habit or manic sober skill. Most people kind of pick one up, whether that's like baking or like a lot of people do pick up reading again because they can focus on things. And I was like, I haven't written in 15 years. And so I started this story as part of my step 4 process, which for those who have not gone through the 12 steps of AA is your fearless and searching moral inventory, which can be awesome and also terrifying because you basically have to make a list of all the things that you did wrong through the process of drinking and who you wronged, and also all of the things that you could have done differently. And that includes a list of people that you have ever dated. If there's ever a chance to do some self reflection, it is staring at a list of every single person you can remember that you've ever dated. And this book started as kind of a reflection of that process and a reflection of the relationships that I had pre and post being widowed and what that looked like for me. I started that story on March 18th and I finished it August 2nd. I gave myself the deadline of my actual high school reunion and I finished it with
Hmm.
3 hours to spare. So it it like I cut it
Really
down to
hitting
the
that
wire, but
deadline.
yes, yeah. But I kind of like I pulled an all-nighter. I told myself like I want this to be finished before I really color my own experience with my high school reunion, because I knew my high school reunion was not going to be anything like what I had planned for the book, and I wanted it to be kind of its own self-sustained thing without that experience coloring it. And I'm glad I did that because it was definitely not the way that the high school reunion went in the book. But I am a caffeinated like storyboarder writer. So I basically sit down with my Trello boards and I have everything outlined that I want to make sure I hit, and then I just go with a bunch of caffeine and rock and roll. So we talked about it at my my release party this week of whether or not planster, pantser, planner, like all of the different varieties of writer, and I'm definitely somewhere in between because I like my organization, but then I'm also just like go with it.
That is excellent. Yeah, I think myself, I'm a little bit in between the different things
Yeah.
as well. And I think that's a really effective way of doing it, finding what methods work for you, taking, a little bit of the different styles and leaving what doesn't work for you. I think that's great.
Yeah, and it leaves a lot more room for creativity too. I've found, at least for myself, because I stare at some of those people who are super organized with their thoughts, and I'm like, my characters are not that obedient. And so when I have a very clear vision of what I want them to do, they tend to go the opposite direction or a little bit like off the jaunt of the path. And so I fear that if I ever went that detailed in my outlining, that I would be sorely disappointed in myself and set myself up for failure in that perspective. And so I'm like, we're gonna do a rough outline and go from there.
Yeah, sometimes our characters have a mind of their own.
Absolutely. And they're naughty like all the time. Like they're just not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
So for anyone who wants to read Go Find Less, where can they find it?
Yeah, it's widely available at pretty much any bookseller that you can think of. It's distributed through Ingram, so anyone at any indie bookstore can order it through their local indie, which is where I always push people to go to if they would like to buy a paperback copy. I am available at Amazon in Kindle Unlimited and on paperback as well. And then you can also buy the ebook through there. And it's available at most major retailers through Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, anything international that carries through Ingram, you can typically order through. And I have a full listing of those on my website as well.
And so do you have any plans for a sequel, or will this be a series?
It is a series. So this is part of the Recovering Good Girls series, which focuses on most of the characters that we've already met in book one. So the book one characters, I focused on building a really wide, diverse cast of characters. So we've got everything from LGBTQ rep to BIPOC rep to neurodiversity rep. And I wanted to make sure that everybody kind of had a character that they felt they could relate to on some sort of level. The series moving forward focuses on almost every pairing has somebody that we've already met in book one, which is good for me because I get to kind of expand on those characters that people really loved while also bringing back those other characters that I know are already coupled, don't need a love story, but people still really enjoyed. Like, for example, the best friend in book one seems to be a personal favorite of a lot of people because she's very tiny and sassy. And so she's definitely making her reappearance in future books. The sequel is planned to come out at the end of this summer. The release dates kind of got pushed because we announced on Tuesday that Blue Nose Audio picked up book one for an audiobook, which is going to be coming out in summer also. So I'm trying to give that some time to breathe, some time to have a little sparkle and shine, and then we'll come out with book two shortly after that as well.
Excellent. So is there anything that you can tell us about book two? Do you have a title set? Have you decided which characters will be leading this one?
Yeah, so I did put at the end of book one kind of a what's next little preview, and that is that this is about Sear Bradley. Her name is Saoirse, and she is in book one is introduced as a sober bartender that works at the company that our main male character owns, and she works at a local Renaissance festival as kind of a pretend princess. And so book two follows her and her love story with a tatted Scottish man that we have not met yet in book one. I know that I writing this MMC has been both great and also terrifying because I want to do justice to all of the people that I know who are actually from Scotland and the UK in general. And so trying to do justice to that, like carrying the verbal cues and the verbal translation of an accent into page has been really interesting. But this story is much more hot and heavy from the get-go. It's very early spice. It's very like immediate chemistry versus book one, which has been very slow burn. I'm hoping to do a trope and title reveal in the next couple of months once I get a little bit further into it. I'm about a quarter of the way through. Book one is about 175,000 words. So it's about, on Kindle pages, it's about 640 pages, which sounds terrifying, but I've been told this is a very fast read for being that much of a thick girl. Book two is going to be about the same. So I'm about 40,000 words in right now, and I'm having a blast writing it. So, but yeah.
Well, I
And
heard Renaissance Fair and Scotsman, so I am in.
Yes. And that comes from personal experience too, because I was on cast at a Renaissance festival here in Texas for several years. And so I'll post occasionally pictures of like me at like the bird show and my big old costume with my hoop skirt. So I'm at least coming from a place of like personal experience and being able to talk about the bodices and the hoop skirts and the crazy hats and the rehearsal schedules and things like that. The MMC aspect of this, it's a little bit more of a black cat golden retriever situation, whereas book one was very much grumpy sunshine, traditional. He's grumpy, she's very happy. Kind of the opposite in this one. And so I'm writing from the perspective of a male who is very happy all the time and very just like go-getter and happy-go-lucky. And I'm having to like pull from my partner who is very much that personality of like, I need some help writing this because I'm used to writing a sassy female character, but for having a male character that is just like sunshine and daisies is a little different for me. So,
Well, it's good that you have him to, kind of bounce that idea off of and pull some inspiration from.
he's absolutely a next level book boyfriend. I'm very lucky to have him to pull from. He's also 6'6", so I can ask him all of the questions about what it's like to be a 6'6" male, which is not as easy as books portray it to be, because you hit a lot of low like doorways and also can never find clothes to fit. And that's my one complaint about romance novels. They're like, oh, this guy's like 6'4" and 300 pounds. I'm like, yeah, but where does he shop for clothes? Where does he get the money for the clothes? Because the clothes are so expensive. The shoes
Where
are
does
so
he
expensive.
shop? Where
Yeah,
does
there's
he
two places you
shop?
could go, guys. Exactly. And I put that in book one. I was like, I don't know where he buys the shirts. I have no idea.
Yeah, I always want to ask, extremely tall people, like, what's the view like from up there? Because I'm 5'1". I don't see anything.
And I'm 5'7", but we're at that stage in our relationship where he just starts putting stuff on the top cabinet without thinking about it, like on top of the cabinet. It's not even like the top shelf. And so I'm like, you do realize that I physically can't reach that shelf, where we now have had a French bulldog with deer antlers for 2 years because I cannot physically reach it and refuse to get on a ladder without somebody spotting me. And if I'm going to have him spot me, I'm just going to have him reach up there and get it. So we've left the Christmas decorations up on the top of the cabinet now for 2 years.
Yeah, and at that point, you don't need
Fun.
a step ladder, you need a whole ladder.
Yes, very much so.
That is excellent. So I want to actually step back to your Renaissance Fair experience. I love Renaissance fairs. I've been going to our local fair for over 20 years, so since I was a kid, and now I bring my kids there as well. So I really want to hear some more about your experience with the Texas Renaissance Festival. Is that one?
I was at Scarborough,
Scarborough.
which is
Okay, okay.
The Dallas local one. And so writing about a Ren Fair, you can pull from all of these different places. I've been to several. I've been to the ones in Oklahoma. I've been to Minnesota. All of the different ones. And so you can pull kind of what they're all like, because they all have their different nuances and their different time periods that they're set in. So their cast is different, who the characters are, and all these things. I was part of a Celtic group. So we were a lane act, which is basically the people who are in the crowds interacting with people versus stage or versus the official cast of the organization. And doing that, you have a little bit more freedom. So we were not always historically accurate. We were not always like PC, which was great because we could like make jokes about, we called fairy boxes, but like cell phones. So we could walk up to people on their fairy boxes and make fun of them and do all the things that like make it funny to be in a place like that while also still being dressed up and in character and all of these great things. That is a lot of where my like improv and writing skills come from, thinking on your feet, because you have to be able to do that when you're interacting with people basically for 10 hours straight, even while you're eating. I mean, we ate in a public forum, so that way we could interact with people and heckle and stuff as we were sitting there. But pulling a lot of that information and a lot of that experience into book two has been really fun, because it's a totally different perspective from people who attend. You don't necessarily get to see the like back end, not necessarily drama, but the back end experience and what that's like, either being on the cast or being as part of a late act, camping on site and staying with people. I even wrote about like staying in a trailer and like being, in the back the campground and what that's like. And so it's kind of a back end view for people who go as children and as adults with their kids and have never really gotten to see that. And as an adult now too, I go and I'll bring my nieces and we'll hang out, and it's totally a different experience going as an adult, watching kids do the things that you got to do as a kid and having that like magical experience. And that's kind of what I was trying to translate into this book, especially.
That is incredible. I cannot wait to read how that translates over.
I'm excited too to write the kind of male perspective on it too, because especially since he is a male coming, or a person coming from the UK, taking in all of these people pretending to be Irish, Scottish, English, and you've got, making fun of people's really bad accents and the costuming and the historical inaccuracies and everything. And I almost got a degree in history, and I probably could have a lot easier than I did journalism, which is what my actual degree's in, because I just had so much like Tudor and Renaissance knowledge. But on that same note, like I said, it's a nuance on which Renaissance festival you're at, where we're basing it, what those characters are, and who those historical points of reference are for that. And so this one is set in Elizabethan England versus Scarborough, which is set in more of a Tudor Henry VIII kind of England. So.
That is incredible. I love that. So we're going to shift gears over into you as a reader and not as much of a writer. So let's go ahead and get started with a really tough question. What is your favorite book?
My favorite book of all time is My Sister's Keeper by Jodi Picoult. That is, it's an older favorite. Like it was not my favorite read of last year. It was not like, it's not something that I've read recently, but when I was younger, I especially read a lot of books my mom would read, because she would just have them either an audiobook or on the shelf. And so I read a lot of like Outlander-y type more adult books as like a middle schooler. And My Sister's Keeper, I think, especially spoke to me because I grew up with an autistic sister who now is a fully functioning adult and the best person and one of my best friends. But as a kid, when you're going through that and having a sibling who is a little bit more hands-on as a child, trying to negotiate those feelings of guilt and of struggling to feel like you are getting attention is really hard. And so My Sister's Keeper, which follows a couple of sisters, one of whom is going through cancer treatment, even though our situation was not that extreme, learning how other people felt that way and those kind of internalized feelings was really nice as a kid going through those feelings. And now as an adult looking back at it, I'm like, oh yeah, man, like I'm really glad I read that book when I did, because it helped me reconcile a lot of those feelings. Now as an adult, most of my favorite books are smut. I love me some like literary fiction and some women's fiction, but I read almost exclusively romance now. And I have no problem with it because it makes me happy. So.
I mean, read what makes you happy. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had read My Sister's Keeper, I want to say my freshman year of high school, so I'm dating myself here. Um, and let me tell you, after that ending, I cried for at least 20 straight minutes.
Yeah.
That was
It'll hit
intense.
you hard. And I think those types of books, I was not reading a lot of those, even back then, like a lot of the more emotionally driven ones. I was reading a lot of fantasy and a lot of historical romance, like the Bridgerton level of type of things. And I read in middle school, we had a teacher who really pushed us to read. So I read like 100 books in one school year because I was competing with people to see how much we could read. So I was picking up like the Ally Carter Gallagher Girls series, which is still one of my favorite series, the YA spy school novel. And that series, like to this day, is one of my favorites that I read all time. But when you read something like that has both like the great storytelling and a emotion driven plot that, like I said, makes you feel all the things, it sticks with you. And I think when you find something like that relates to you personally, it's really hard for that to leave you. And that's kind of where I went into Go Find Less writing it. Was I knew that if I had something like this that I had read, or that somebody like going through my situation had read, I would have appreciated knowing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, because I unfortunately know so many other people who are either widows or who have lost their boyfriends and partners and fiancés or wives and girlfriends. And so knowing that there is a life after that, or a life after just any sort of breakup and grief and trauma, I think is really important for people to be able to relate to as well.
I agree. I think that relating to content, whether it is something that you are reading or something that you are writing, is really important. You know, through books, we are able to connect with so many others on a deeper emotional level through shared experiences or just seeing, how we each process things in different and similar ways. And I think that's just a wonderful thing that the world of books has given us.
Absolutely. And we see that too, especially being part of like the Bookstagram community and book talk and everything. We I think that's one of the biggest things that I got out of being on there just as a reader at the beginning, um, because that's really the lifeblood of what especially indie authors do, right? Is we connect with readers on more of a personal level and kind of get to know them, and then also write stories and then share those experiences that inspire them. And so that's one of my favorite parts about being involved with like my advanced reader team and I have what's called, like, we call it a hype squad, but it's our like Discord server and a separate chat and everything. And so building those personal relationships with people who will then kind of take your story out to the world and share it is a big part of why I love this community so much.
And I think that is such a great thing about indie publishing, and very new with indie publishing.
Yeah.
I don't think this was such a huge thing even 5 years ago. Just
Yeah.
the community and the connections that you can make between authors and readers and creating, as you said, a hype team, support teams. We are building really genuine connections. And that's something that you don't see quite as often in traditional publishing, though I am seeing a little bit of it more. It's starting to grow a little more that way. But indie publishing has really paved the way for those interpersonal connections.
Yeah, and I love seeing even trad publishing authors go through kind of that. You see the friendships evolving over the years, right? And so watching them hype each other up in comments, I'm like, oh yeah, they're so cute. But getting to like see those things change over time has been really fun. And I think it's a product too of the generations that are kind of coming into writing and publishing too. Because for me at least, I remember even, and this will date me too, like middle school, late elementary school, middle school, and high school, having like MySpace and Tumblr and all of those communities that we worked to build. And then like having really nowhere to go because at the time, like fanfiction.com and like specific fanfiction websites were really the only outlets we had to like share anything that we were working on. And so now, and Wattpad was still kind of like a relatively new thing back then. And so when you're talking about people who have been writing for decades, but really had nowhere to share it that wasn't querying an agent and finding a publisher and all of these things, we're now looking at those people who grew up in that generation to say, okay, well, if I can't find it, I'm going to build it myself. And I feel like that's kind of where we're at now is as adults is like, I remember having those communities on all of these other social platforms. And as those have kind of drifted out, as we've no longer had the MySpace and the Tumblr, and we've drifted into the Instagram and the TikTok, having those communities kind of transition into those spaces, which is really fun because I feel like the vibe is very different, but it's such a fun place to be like every day. I yet to have a bad day on Bookstagram, knock on wood, but everything has gone really well and I'm very thankful for that community. So
Absolutely. And you know what? I also started with fanfiction.net.
yeah,
That
yeah,
that is where my very first place that I ever published anything at all. And now today I'm actually repurposing one of those old fan fictions from God, 15 years ago into a new story today and, taking some elements that I really enjoyed and leaving the rest and building a whole new story from there that I will also be publishing. And I see that that's kind of a common trend
yeah.
within the last few years too, is everyone's like, you know what? I love this old story. My writing has improved. Why not? Just why not?
Yeah,
Rewrite it, put it together, adjust it to fit whatever new world you want to create. And we no longer have to, fight tooth and nail to get it out there. People can still publish traditionally if they want. I personally am going to try the traditional avenue first. But if that doesn't work out, we still have so many options of doing it on our own. And I think that
Yeah.
is so important. It gives everyone a voice and gives everyone a chance to get their story out there.
Yeah, and the fan fiction aspect too. I mean, there's so many people who started out as fan fiction writers too, right? You've got Ali Hazelwood, you've got Julie Soto, most notably recently. And I read Julie's debut as part of, it's actually our first book club pick at the indie bookstore that I work at. And for a romance book club pick, I should say that. And we had a blast with it. And I know that when you're picking up old stories like that, and I don't know if Forget Me Not was one of her old fan fictions or if it was a completely new, first start story. But for me, like even looking at those old ones, I'm like, I definitely have some really great ideas here that I can pull and repurpose and have other things, to the point where part of the reason why I've been able to map out the series that I have with Recovering Good Girls is because I have this backlog and Rolodex of things that I already wrote. That being said, like I had like a huge conversation with somebody on Threads, was it a couple days ago, about how one of my favorite things growing up was Degrassi. And so Fitz, who is our main character in Go Find Les, is named so because I wrote a Fitz fan fiction from the character of Degrassi 15 years ago that was really like, it was like a 200,000 word 11 chapter like fan fiction. It was a lot. It was a lot, like a lot, a lot.
Wow, that's
But it
impressive.
was one of those ones where like you should follow along the actions of the show, so you already had a lot like built into it that you could pull on. But I was like, okay, I really like the name Fitz, but I don't want to name him like right after that. So his full name is Fitzwilliam because his mom's obsessed with Pride and Prejudice. And so we've got Fitzwilliam Westfall, but he goes by Fitz. And so when we're talking about it, he's like, "Oh yeah, like I love Degrassi too." I'm like, no, like I have the deep cut. Like I named my character after a minuscule like season. I don't know, season 12, I think, of Degrassi character, and I don't even live in Canada. I was just obsessed with the kid. Like it was a problem as a teenager. I was very obsessed.
That is amazing. I think fan fiction is also important because it really helps us, especially those of us who started fan fiction when we were younger. I personally credit it for honing my writing abilities so much. I mean, I always worked on original stories at the same time too, but anytime I got stuck, it's just, well, go into fan fiction. You already know the source content, so you don't have to focus so much on the world building and the plot aspects of it, and you can focus primarily just on your writing abilities. And fan fiction is a huge part of basically learning how to write.
Yeah, and that's been one of the funniest parts about this whole process is I've been sharing my book on my personal side of life because I am one of those rare people who is very open and honest with my personal friends and family about what I write and how I write it and the fact that it's spicy and all of these things in a very small setting with my personal friends and family. They're all like, "Oh, I remember when you were like sitting writing, you'd stay up all night writing fan fiction and doing all these things, and now you actually have like a published book." And these are people I haven't like been close to or haven't had like a one-on-one conversation in person within a decade, but they're like, "Oh my god, like this is like a crazy journey from A to Z." And watching those kinds of relationships evolve with people who I know like used to read my Harry Potter fan fiction way back in the day, now reading my like spicy second chance romance is very funny to me.
And that's also really great that the people who read you so long ago are coming back to read you again now. It really
Yeah, the
goes back to the
support.
connections we've made and the support that we get from those connections over the years.
The support has been, I have been blown away by not even just like my friends and family support and people who I talk to all the time, but the people who have kind of been in the periphery for the last several years who I know have kind of watched my journey as I was a full-time caregiver basically for my late husband through his passing, through meeting my partner and my sobriety and all these other things. So I know they've watched this whole journey. And so now they're kind of getting to see the product of that and how it kind of came out in that, what the ways that I worked those problems through the storytelling. And on top of that, getting to kind of share those experiences with a whole new set of people has been really fun, and getting to kind of build from the ground up with one of my best friends, Lindsay Rodin, who is a fantasy author. Her debut is coming out in a couple weeks. It's somebody that I've known for over a decade. I was at her wedding 10 years ago this week, and we kind of worked really hard to build like a group of beta and alpha readers, and then also kind of ARC teams of kind of a combination of friends and then like a whole new community as well. And so that's one of the things I'm most proud about in this last year, has been rebuilding that relationship with her and kind of having that support system and making sure that that's intact, especially moving in as we go into this year, which is going to be insane.
I love that. And I expect a very busy and successful year for you coming up.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Now, I know that you are new to publishing. However, you have such a great community that you have built over the years and through now. So, if we have any listeners who want to get into publishing themselves and building ARC teams and beta teams, what advice do you have for creating those connections for someone who's very new and like just jumping in for the first time?
The biggest piece of advice is something that I probably should have listened to myself, which is the worst thing they can say is no. And I'm the first person to tell you, I make friends by pestering people until they like me. And that's just my personality. If you've ever done strengths finders or any of those like personality tests, they tell you like your top 5 strengths. And my partner and I are complete opposites. The only one we have in common is strategic in our top 5. His bottom 5 are my top 5 for the most part, and my top 5 are his, like we're like flip flop. But for my entire life, woo is my top one, which is winning others over. Winning others over is literally pestering people until they like you. And that's just been my personality as long as I could remember. And so I just started talking to people and making friends and requesting arcs and sending back messages on TikTok and on Instagram. And as a reader, as a reviewer, when I was building this community last year, I think it paid off in a way that I built trust with a lot of people. And the entire time, they all knew that I was working on this story in the background. But when you're sharing without expectations of reciprocation, it helps a lot to be able to build that. When you're sharing things with no plans to receive anything in return, and when you're being a cheerleader in the most like literal sense possible, it means the world to authors. And now as an author, I can say that because I've seen it from the other side. But I have, indie authors who published their debut last year that I have seen go from like 5, 6 paperback copies sold to now have audiobook deals and like are, what we would call like mainstream Bookstagram book talk popular. And those types of relationships, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so excited for you screaming in the background. And those relationships are built because you have to just go for it. I am a socially awkward person, but I feel like being behind the screen helps a lot in that aspect because it gives you a little bit more of like a feeling of, okay, if I screw this up, like I'm at least kind of somewhat anonymous and I'm not like making a butt of myself in person at least, which is my fear, like that I'll spill something or that I'll, trip over something while I'm trying to also like introduce myself, which happens literally all the time. But starting out this process, wish somebody would have said, like, just the worst they can say is no. Like, literally.
Honestly, the worst they can say is no is some of the best advice I've ever heard because it doesn't hurt to ask what's going to happen. The worst they can say
Yeah.
is no.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's kind of how I approached all of this. And you mentioned kind of wanting to go trad first, like trying trad first. And I really thought about what I wanted to do with Go Find Less as a story kind of once I finished it, once I like typed the end of the, what do I want to do? And I feel like for me, and especially for the genre of the story, right? It's not a fantasy, it's not a dark romance. It is a very mixed bag, emotional, contemporary romance. And I've seen so many of my friends make a very successful world out of indie because of the control level is so different comparatively to trad. When you're talking about a fantasy or a romantasy type of book, it's for me at least, watching those people go through that trad process, you're in charge of the world that you've built, and you have such a unique perspective on it that there is minimal change, at least in my opinion, and you may have a very different opinion on this, that can be made that wouldn't direly alter the storyline, that you can keep kind of that ownership and that familiarity of it for your story. Like, it's your story, and it's harder as a trad publisher. For myself, it is easier to maintain that storyline as a fantasy author with traditional publishing, because you are the only person who can really dictate where that story goes with that fantasy world. Does that make sense? Whereas for me with contemporary, I feel like there are so many opportunities with traditional publishing for that story to get cut and to get changed and really truly mainstreamed in a way that I really didn't want this story specifically to go. I have been very lucky to see a lot of those fantasy and romantasy authors who have had their stories really well maintained and really well honored through that traditional publishing aspect, because that world building is so unique, and because it's so hard for a publisher to come in and say, well, we need to change this, and this, because it's a unique world you're building. And when we're talking about contemporary, it feels a little bit easier for that story to get changed. And in that regard, I knew that it could completely change the way that like the story was told. I feel like I'm rambling at this point, but
No, you're good. You're good.
But I wanted to make sure that the story got told the way that I wanted it to be told. And for me, that was a lot more important than trying to go through the trad system. I also am kind of just like a let's do this, get it over with kind of person. And so I wanted to like streamline that process of like, I don't want to wait 3 years for this to hit shelves. I want it to be in people's hands as soon as it's done editing, as soon as it's gone through that process. And I'm incredibly lucky that I have a beta team that includes published authors and technical writers and people who really like gave it a hard look at before it went off to anybody else. But I wanted to make sure that story was really honored in a way that respected not just me, but my friends and family who went through that experience with me too.
And it really helps you not only just tell your story, but keep it authentic in the way that you want it to be.
That's the biggest thing too, is I wasn't building a world that was totally my own as far as a magic system or a beautiful kingdom of all of these different things. I was really talking about the friends and family and people that I had, and those people were so much more important to me to maintain their personalities and their friendships, even if they aren't specifically people in my life, just pieces of them. That part of it was so much more important to me than trying to pitch a story that people would buy. And I'm very lucky and very thankful that people have really loved the story. But even if I had had 10 readers who really loved the story, I would still be happy with it, because it means I've found 10 people that love the story.
I love that. Okay, so we are starting to get low on time here. So why don't you tell us where we can find you?
Yeah, so I am on all social platforms: TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Most of them are at Thea Claire Author, TheaClaire. And my website is theaclaireauthor.com. I have a full listing of all of the places you can Go Find Less. I have a little bit of information on book 2 on there. And then as soon as we have more information on the audiobook, I will also share that on there. And be sure to follow the social pages, sign up for my email newsletter on my website, and then you'll be able to get all of the insider information as soon as it's out.
Excellent. Thank you. I will be including all of these links on the Spotify episode description, as well as the Must Love Books Instagram and Facebook pages.
Perfect.
Thank you. Do you have any final messages you'd like to share?
I think if there's anything I have learned in the last year, is that you are never too much. And if they tell you you're too much, you can tell them to go find less.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. This has been Must Love Books. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon under @Must Love Books Podcast. Thank you and happy reading.